or quiet space to even, fill out the FAFSA or join in on classes. Many of our students have shared their struggle with turning on their webcams because they feel like they're not in a place where they feel comfortable turning their webcam on and seeing the background behind them, because they might have other siblings in the room with them or the space that they might be in. And also just in general, homeless youth, as well as many other individuals in this country, they have lost their jobs, and they might be working some jobs that have increased their exposure to people, and they might be in a living situation, as Melinda said, with staying with other people that could be really difficult for them to self-isolate if needed. And so this was already mentioned a little bit, but with the McKinney-Vento Act, I just want to say as a reminder, this law requires that every local education agency designate a liaison for homeless students, and their responsibilities include ensuring that unaccompanied homeless youth are informed that they qualify as an independent student on the FAFSA. And these individuals should also assist these students in obtaining verification about this status. And so again, with the pandemic happening in March, we were really concerned when schools were closing that some of these students might not be getting their letter from their liaisons. And so we just want to reiterate how important it is for liaisons to make sure that students get this letter and that the students will save it somewhere safe. And then on this slide, Melinda already talked about, the definition of homelessness, but we just want to add on that say specifically for unaccompanied homeless youth, those are youth under the age of 24 who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And so unaccompanied homeless youth and youth who are at risk of homelessness and self-supporting, they are considered independent students, which means as an independent student, you do not need to fill out any parental information on the FAFSA. And unaccompanied homeless youth, they actually need to provide documentation to verify this independent student status. And there are 4 entities that are listed here on the slide that can make this determination. So number 1, a school district liaison, 2, a director or designee of a HUD shelter, 3, a director or designee of a runaway and homeless youth shelter, and then 4, a financial aid administrator. And so these 4 entities can write a letter that verify the student was experiencing homelessness on or after July 1st of the year that they're filling out the FAFSA, and that will mark them as an independent student. And so again, this process happens every single year that a student is filling out the FAFSA. And these are the 4 individuals that can make this determination. And I'll get into what happens after the first year a little bit later. But first, I just wanted to share that earlier this month, we released a report that analyzed FAFSA unaccompanied homeless youth data over the last 6 years. And so we found these 5 trends, which are on the slide. And I just want to highlight that overall, unaccompanied homeless youth applicants increased by 38% over the last 6 years. And homeless liaisons and financial aid administrator determinations increased during that time, but the number of homeless service providers did not. Overall, determinations made by financial aid administrators are only about 7% of the overall number of unaccompanied homeless youth FAFSA determinations. And so to read the full report, you can click on the link listed on the slide. And these are the numbers that go along with the trend I just mentioned. So again, you can see it broken up by the 4 different entities and just the overall numbers of unaccompanied homeless youth reported on the FAFSA in the last 6 years. So for many of you right now that are joining us, you might be helping and preparing seniors to get their determination letter for the FAFSA. And so again, the FAFSA determination process happens every year. And so these next few slides, I'm going to go through the FAFSA process after this first year. And so you can prepare your students on what to anticipate and help them be set up for success. So McKinney-Vento liaisons can continue to write letters for these students as long as the liaison has kept in touch with the student and knows enough information to make a determination. However, if this student has become homeless after high school, so say their sophomore year in college, They might not know their liaison in high school because they weren't homeless when they were in high school. They also might not have been staying at a shelter. And so if that's the case, then the financial aid administrator would have the responsibility to make this determination. And so these next few slides, there's a ton of information. It's a little bit directed towards financial aid administrators, but I think it's really important and beneficial for you all to understand this process so you can explain it to your students and also advocate for them as well. At Schoolhouse Connection, we get so many emails and calls from students and liaisons and service providers with the FAFSA just because it's super confusing. And this process can really be educational for everyone. And so we really want to make sure that you all understand this process. And all of this information is from the application and verification guide, which is linked on our financial aid page, which I'll have added to the resources slide. So you'll have all this information on one web page. And so the first thing I want to say is that financial aid administrators do not need to verify the answers on the FAFSA homeless questions unless they have conflicting information. And so conflicting information doesn't mean that the financial aid administrator disagrees with one of the authorized entities that wrote a letter. And so these financial aid administrators, they should just be accepting these letters and just those letters. They shouldn't be asking for any additional documentation from the authorized entities as long as the college doesn't have any conflicting information. And so we've seen some schools sometimes ask for more documentation and more information and paperwork, which can be really stressful and just add more barriers for students. And that might be just one student's, final straw. They might say, that's it, college isn't worth it. I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. And then they just give up. So we really want to make sure that we're not adding any additional barriers with filling out the FAFSA for unaccompanied homeless youth because it's already demanding and asking so much. And so there are 3 questions on the FAFSA about homelessness. And if a student claims to be experiencing homelessness, but cannot answer any of these unaccompanied homeless youth questions, then the financial aid administrator has a responsibility to make this homeless youth determination. And the financial aid administrator, they should only make this determination if the student is unaccompanied or homeless or at risk of being homeless, but they shouldn't be questioning why the student is experiencing homelessness. And so the financial aid administrator, they might conduct a documented interview with a student, asking them to share their living experience over the last year. They also might ask the student to write a written personal statement. And we know that sometimes financial aid administrators might ask the question why, but that really shouldn't be the purpose. It should really focus on if the student is unaccompanied or homeless. We actually created this really amazing resource that helps students prepare for this documented interview if it gets to that point. And again, it's on our financial aid page. But we really just want to make sure that if a school district liaison or a director of a HUD or RHYA shelter has provided a written form or letter or has conducted a documented phone call with a financial aid administrator, that is sufficient verification, and the financial aid administrator should not be asking for more. But what is kind of difficult is there isn't an official federal form or template or anything for these authorized entities to use. And so we've actually created our own sample letter, which is linked to this page. And again, it's on our financial aid website as well. But this letter can be used by any of the authorized entities that I have just mentioned. We already put one up for this upcoming school year, so you're all good to go there. And then NCHE, they actually created a template specifically for financial aid administrators to make determinations. And so these 2 forms can be used to make those determination letters. It's pretty simple. That's all you really need to say the student is homeless and they should be independent, and you should be good to go with that. And so for financial aid administrators, if they are having a documented interview and making a homeless youth determination, students can actually provide additional information from third parties like Gear Up and Trio and counselors and doctors and other folks that are listed here on the slide. but just want to say that if a student is not connected to any of these resources, it is completely okay. They can just have a documented interview with a financial aid administrator, and the financial aid administrator should be able to make a determination just based on a documented interview. And you do not need all these additional third parties. And so this next slide goes over some other helpful and practical tips. First of all, the FAFSA is out now, so please communicate with your students to start filling it out as soon as possible. Truly, as soon as students fill it out, the more likely they're able to receive the most and max amount of aid that is awarded to them. And so we're also encouraging people to start holding office hours, either in person or virtually, for students experiencing homelessness, so they can answer any questions. You can go over the determination process. And again, just reminding students that they need to do this process every year. And so after their first year, that process might look a little bit different, especially if they're not connected with their liaison. So being able to let them know, all right, these are the people that you need to talk to in order to get your determination letter. We also want financial aid administrators to be mindful and to understand the distinct needs of unaccompanied homeless youth so they can remove some of these additional barriers for students. So whether that's conducting training with them, with the financial aid administrators, sending them information like this PowerPoint or other resources that we have, just letting them know that requiring excessive documentation or having a notary, those are all unnecessary and causes more barriers for these students, but especially right now in a pandemic, getting something notarized is not easy to begin with, but right now in light of COVID, it is really hard for these students to do all these additional hoops just to get their FAFSA completed. And then lastly, there was new guidance over the summer that explains that allows students who do not need to file taxes to verify their income through means other than the verification of non-filing and W-2s. So that link brings you to that federal guidance. And so we just want to make sure that students understand, as well as professionals here know, this new guidance that came out over the summer. And if you have more questions and want to learn more about the FAFSA and hear from a liaison and a service provider themselves, SchooolHouse Connection is actually hosting a free webinar on Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern. And so you can register with a link on the slide, and I will drop it into the chat box as well if you want to register for that. But we are coming to the end of the presentation, so I want to encourage folks to ask questions in the chat box if you have those. I am going to go through some of these resources that are listed on this page. We have a ton of different resources for homelessness and college and higher education and financial aid. We have a ton of archived higher education webinars and tools. I want to highlight our youth connection resources, which is the fourth bullet on this slide. But these are resources that are created for students and by students. We actually contracted a lot of our students over the summer to create resources that they wish that they had when they were in high school or when they were preparing for college. And so I put two really great ones on the link, but we have a ton of other great youth focused resources there. And then also the last bullet point, the financial aid page that I've mentioned a few times, it's broken into really great different categories for youth, for K through 12, for service providers, higher ed professionals, different laws and policies and research, and the new report that I mentioned that analyzes homeless youth data over the last 6 years. And so lastly, as part of our ongoing efforts to connect youth, children, and families experiencing homelessness with help, we released a new public service announcement, and that's aimed specifically at youth experiencing homelessness. And so this is narrated by Des, one of our scholars and students with lived experience. And this PSA aims to reassure youth experiencing homelessness that they are not alone. And it really helps break the stigma and fear to seek support and point them in the direction of help. So you can go to ideserveaneducation.org. There's this PSA and other resources there as well. And we'd love if you can just share this out in your network to help elevate this issue. And so again, Please let us know if you have questions. I'm turning it to our contact information. So if you have specific questions there, you can email us, but we have a few minutes here to answer questions. So so someone asked about the PowerPoint. The slides will be made available after the conference, but if you really want the slides right now, I'm happy to send them over to you if you want to shoot me an email. And
Jillian,
yes.
while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I just wanted to highlight a real life student story that might be of interest to folks. And it's a student who had received his associate's degree at a community college and transferred to his dream school, which was a state university here in Washington State, and had been homeless for quite some time. And the financial aid advisor that he was working with on the university campus either was not familiar with the process, or, I'm not quite sure what happened there, but instead of just following the typical guidance from the AVG, the Application and Verification Guide, and the kinds of information that Jillian set out for you in her slides, the financial aid advisor used basically her own judgment and decided that this particular student was not homeless because he was in contact with his mother, which made no sense at all. But it was really disappointing. He was so frustrated, and he said, of course I'm in contact with my mother. Just because I haven't lived with her in several years doesn't mean I don't love my mother. And of course we're in contact. But because of that judgment call on the part of the financial aid advisor, he was denied his homeless status. He didn't get his financial aid, and then he had to drop out. And he was a very talented student. In fact, he was tutoring the other students in his cohort in his math major, but he was no longer able to attend classes. And so I think it's just sort of a cautionary note with these real life students that have real life stories, and trying to reduce those barriers that could keep them from reaching their goals educationally.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Melinda. I know over the summer we worked with a ton of students who were just having trouble, contacting their financial aid administrators and getting their FAFSA figured out. And so just want to remind folks that the FAFSA ends in June. So we tend to make sure that our students are all squared up and good to go beforehand. But it's really difficult for financial aid administrators sometimes they're so quick to try to use professional judgment, and professional judgment is not the same thing as unaccompanied homeless youth determination. So sometimes just educating and pointing it out in the AVG really is all that financial aid administrators need to just kind of make them realize like, oh, this is different. But thank you so much for sharing. And I'm seeing if anyone has questions, but haven't seen any yet. And if folks have other stories that they want to share in the chat, or any, scenarios that you have experienced with helping students with their financial aid, feel free to add that in the chat as well.
One other tip that I might suggest, I know that we have several different states that are attending this session right now, but in Washington State, every school district liaison who works with homeless students in their school districts is posted on our state education agency website. And so depending on which state you are in, you would probably be able to find out who in every school district works with students experiencing homelessness, so that they could assist with that warm handoff between the K-12 environment and the higher ed environment. If you need more information about that, let us know. That is part of the requirement under McKinney-Vento, is that those homeless liaisons, the names and contact information are available to folks. We also in Washington State have a cohort of college level support folks who are sort of a point of contact at the colleges and universities. So that's out there too. And then Jillian, I see a question that just came in. Are there any financial resources for undocumented homeless youth?
Thanks for sharing. So there are definitely some scholarships that are available for undocumented homeless youth, including our own scholarship that just the deadline just ended last week. But I know different states have specific resources for undocumented students, and it looks like someone just wrote the passport designate support staff on college campus in Washington. Melinda, I'm not sure if you know any other specific financial resources for undocumented homeless youth.
You know, in the K-12 environment, you know, school districts can use Title I funds or McKinney-Vento funds to support any students who are homeless. It does not matter if they're documented or undocumented. If we're looking at students who are in a higher ed environment, at community college or at a university, I don't know of any specific resources for undocumented homeless youth, but I believe it may vary from institution to institution. I have a son right now who is attending University of Washington, and there are certain programs and supports for kids, but I don't know, you know, universally how that would shake out. So that's something that we could certainly get more information about.
Thank you, Dawn, for adding that link right there for the designated support staff.
Yeah, we were very excited when we were able to partner and find out more about who the designated support staff were on college campuses. Some of the other states were a little bit ahead of us on that. So thank you, Dawn, for posting.
Yeah, just to go off on that, a lot of states that do have designated support staff or homeless higher education liaisons, in the law, some of them actually have as their responsibility, the purpose of these individuals are to help students with their financial aid. And so we tend to do a lot of training on this piece, and we've actually helped a lot of different states, create this law, including in Tennessee and in California. And so it's not enough just for us to get this law passed and have it, signed in, which is great, but we also want to make sure that we're following up and doing implementation and training. And that's why presentations and conferences like these are just so important, because it is a nice reminder that these are responsibilities that to be held. And so I'm just really thankful that we're able to have this opportunity to present and share this information with you all.
We do have some time, so please feel free to ask any questions that you might have, whether it's about McKinney-Vento in general or specific to the financial aid supports. We're happy to answer. You've got us. I'm curious, our audience members, if you are currently a financial aid advisor at a university or a college setting, if you could just kind of give us a hello in the chat box. I'm just kind of curious to see who our audience is. We don't want to be singing to the choir here, but it would be great to know who you are, or if you're with a school district as well. Oh, great. New York, you're up. Well, Jillian, I'm not seeing questions in the chat box.
Yeah, neither am I. And so I know we have someone else from Washington. Um, I know that Kelly said that there will be a 10-minute and 1-minute warning when the session's about to end, but we just want to make sure that folks are not leaving the breakout room and not the Zoom meeting. And so if we don't have any other questions, you're happy to, mute yourself, go take a quick break, and you'll get shuffled back into the main room. But for right now, I think I'll still be here for a little bit longer. But again, if you have questions, feel free to email either Melinda or myself, and we'll make sure that you get those slides either after the presentation, or again, if you want to email me, I can send those to you as well.
Yes, thank you to everyone who attended. Appreciate the opportunity to bring you this information, and let us know if you have questions, and appreciate everyone who's chiming in now in the chat about where you're from. This is great for us just to see who's in the audience. So have a terrific week, and let us know if you have additional questions. We'll get the slides out to you.
Thanks all.